Christine to read out a few House rules.
Thank you, Chairman. Good evening. Thank you to all attending the Economic Development Committee this evening and to those who are watching this meeting live via our YouTube channel. To those who are present with us this evening, I would just like to run through some brief housekeeping rules with you. Please could we ask you to use the hand sanitizer when entering and exiting the room this evening, and you will find sanitizers located within the room should you require to use this during the meeting. We ask that face coverings are worn when moving around the room and are only removed when you are seated or standing to talk on an item. Please also remember to follow the social distancing guidelines in place. We are operating a one-way system in the room this evening and you will see signs on the doors to assist you. We are not expecting any test fire drills this evening. However, if you should hear a fire alarm, please make your way out of the room and down the stairs where officers will assist you to the evacuation location, which is across the road outside the Star Hotel. Anybody requiring help in the event of an evacuation, please make yourself known to officers and the relevant assistance will be provided. Please could I ask that all mobile phones are either switched off or put onto silent mode, please. Members, I will remind you that should you wish to speak, please raise your hand and wait for myself or the Chairman to acknowledge you, and your name will be added to those wishing to speak. When called to speak, you will be required to press the button on your microphone in front of you, which will turn red when active. Please can we ask that you speak both loudly and clearly into the microphone so that those watching live can hear you. When voting this evening, members, this will be undertaken by a show of hands. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Christine. All right. Following agenda, item 1 is apologies for absence.
I have apologies for absence from Councillors Cordner, Achenbach, Councillor Price and Councillor Talbot. Councillor Flaxman-Taylor will be subbing this evening for Councillor Price.
Okay, thank you. Any declarations of interest? Not seeing any. We have the minutes of the meeting held on the 7th of June 2021, pages 4 to 11. I'll go through those pages one by one. If anybody has any comments to make on the or amendments to make, please just let me know. Page 4, page 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, and 11. Can I sign those minutes as a true record? I consider silence assent. There you go. Item 4 is the forward plan, page 12. Any comments on the forward plan? Again, not seeing anything. See those plans accepted. We're going to do a little change on the agenda at the moment as we're looking for a particular piece of paper, but we're now going to do item 6 first, the Enterprise Zone Local Enterprise Partnership Update. And I do believe we have Julian Munson here from NALEP who's going to do a presentation for us. Welcome.
Good evening. Can you hear me okay? A bit too loud.
A bit closer to you so we can hear you a little better.
Can you hear me okay? Is that okay? Excellent. Right. Good evening, everyone. Really good to be here. I'm Julian Munson. I'm Head of Enterprise Zones and Innovation at New Anglia Local Enterprise Partnership. I've been in economic development for over 25 years, but a good proportion of my career has actually been working quite locally in this area in Lowestoft and Great Yarmouth. So I feel like it's sort of coming home in some respects because we do a lot of work and some great work with the officers here at the borough, not least on enterprise zones, but other projects as well I'm involved with. Just for information, I'm on the Great Yarmouth Town Deal Board, and I'm also involved in the O&M campus as well, which I will touch on as part of my presentation. So I appreciate the opportunity to speak today. I was just going to give an update on our enterprise zone in Great Yarmouth, but just before I move on to that, I just wanted to touch on the sort of national picture with enterprise zones, and I'm hoping you can see the slides okay. Just to give a brief background context, enterprise zones are not a new phenomenon. They've been around as government policy for actually many decades and have come in different shapes and forms. More recently, in 2012, the 24 new enterprise zone sites were launched, which included Great Yarmouth and Lowestoft, which was actually the first in the country which was a multi-site enterprise zone. So traditionally they were single sites, and there were financial incentives for those specific sites to encourage businesses to relocate and expand onto those sites. So this Great Yarmouth and Lowestoft enterprise zone was the first in the UK which had sort of a number of different sites. So there's actually 6 sites that form your enterprise zone. 2 of those are in Great Yarmouth and Gorleston, and 4 of those are in Lowestoft and Beccles. And so it's been a really interesting collaborative project between Great Yarmouth Borough Council, Waveney District Council, the 2 county councils, and also the LEP as well. There were 24 new zones announced in 2016 and 2017, just for background information. So we have another enterprise zone for Norfolk and Suffolk called Space to Innovate, and that's 10 further sites which cover a number of different locations across Norfolk and Suffolk. And in many areas, actually, enterprise zones have been a really interesting policy tool to help kickstart development on sites that have been traditionally quite difficult to move forward. And the primary focus has been the opportunity for businesses to access business rate relief over a period of 5 years. But also there's been planning tools being put in place like local development orders, and that's been applied here in Yarmouth, which has been an incredibly successful tool to actually enable and fast-track planning processes for local companies that are expanding. So enterprise zones can really help unlock development, enhance that infrastructure, ultimately attract businesses and help businesses grow and create new jobs. And importantly for the Great Yarmouth and Lowestoft enterprise zone, because it has a focus on the energy sector, it's been a really interesting tool to help encourage clustering of companies, particularly on Beacon Park, which I was going to come back to in a moment. But the majority of companies on Beacon Park are in the energy sector supply chain. So it really helps companies cluster together. And as I've touched on, these are partnerships between local authorities and the LEP. So there's a legal agreement in place between the local authorities and New Anglia Local Enterprise Partnership. And there's a 25-year lifespan. And so all the business rates increase basically are collected and retained locally to either reinvest back into the site or to support other projects in the wider area. And there's 4 key principles. Really for the newer enterprise zones, it's very much about generating economic opportunity. It's about looking at the long-term viability. So it's not just about propping up companies in the short term with rate relief and that's it. It's actually about trying to stabilize the cluster to enable businesses to survive without needing government support longer term. So it really is about that longer term viability. And importantly, it's about that strategic fit as well. It's about those companies that are investing in those sites that you, as a borough, would want to see developed. And Beacon Park is a classic example of that. The other one being South Deans around the port area as well. And then sort of minimising that displacement. So displacement is when companies move from another part of a local area onto a site to access rate relief. So there's very, very limited examples of this nationally. We've done some work about 3 years ago, and we actually found that with the exception of one business, all of your local companies on your enterprise zones have seen a net increase in jobs. On average, there's been a 30% increase in jobs within the businesses created or moved onto those enterprise zone sites. So I've just skipped over this one because I've covered most of this. This is, so you've got your Great Yarmouth and Lowestoft enterprise zone, which we're talking about today. We've got the Space to Innovate enterprise zone, which covers 10 other sites across Norfolk and Suffolk. There's plenty of information on our website if you want to just kind of get the information on all of the jobs created and businesses supported, land developed, the investment from the public and private sector. This is across all of our 16 sites across Norfolk and Suffolk. It's quite interesting because we have to religiously collect data every single quarter on all of our enterprise zone sites across Norfolk and Suffolk. It's a very involved process, and we can't do that without the district authorities and the county councils and also the local land owners and developers as well. So it's something that we have to report back to government on a very regular basis, and so we've got access to all the statistics that you might wish to read if you're interested. So I want to move on to sort of obviously the more local level. So in terms of Great Yarmouth and Lowestoft Enterprise Zone across your 6 sites, so that obviously includes the Lowestoft ones as well, there's been almost 2,000 jobs created and safeguarded since the Enterprise Zone was established in 2012. If somebody wants to ask the question about what's that actually been for Yarmouth, I can say, because I checked the figures before I came here, it's around 50% of those jobs are in the borough, so on Great Yarmouth site and also the Galston site. So just under 1,000 jobs created. Importantly, there's a sort of a wider supply chain around construction as well. So a lot of local contractors obviously pick up work to construct these buildings, develop the sites, electricians as well. So there's 806 jobs supported there. And overall, 74 businesses have been supported and are growing across the Enterprise Zone sites in this area. 32 hectares of land has been developed, and also 55,000 square metres of new floor space. So up until that point, all of those are pretty much split equally between the old Waveney district and Great Yarmouth Borough, with the exception of the new floor space, where you've seen about 70% of the floor space has actually been created in Great Yarmouth Borough. And also with the public sector investment, you've seen the majority of that 178 million coming into the borough as well, which has helped unlock those sites. And as I've mentioned, there's regular performance reports to government and also the local authority partners and the LEP board. Just wanted to touch on 2 or 3 case studies, because I think this sort of helps bring this to life. Although it says Great Yarmouth and Lowestoft Enterprise Zone, all of those images there relate to the borough. Taking the sort of top left first and then working clockwise round. So it's quite obvious there's an aerial shot there of Beacon Park, but that was clearly taken a few years ago, possibly about 6 years ago, I think. So that was before the road sort of punched through to the new housing development. You'll see some early signs of new buildings going up there. And I would say today, I think it's pretty much, well, I'm told it's pretty much built out or it's fully let. All of the buildings are now fully let. It's been through an interesting period because obviously, because of most of the companies are in the energy supply chain, the oil and gas sector has had a challenging time over the last decade. And so for some of those businesses, there have been some dicier moments, for sure. But I'm really pleased to say today that that site is now fully complete and is now regarded by government as one of the most successful enterprise zone sites in the whole of the country. And I wish I could have found the aerial shot that I had from 2011 and a recent aerial shot which showed the before and after of Beacon Park. It really is quite transformational. The top right corner, there's 2 shots basically on the right hand side of 2 buildings. Despite the Ford Escort van, which is actually 20 years old, those 2 pictures were taken 4 days ago by my colleague Eunice Edwards, and I should acknowledge Eunice because Eunice would have been here tonight, and she's done an enormous amount of work over the years working with the borough on this particular enterprise zone site. So they are 2 companies which started off in the Innovation Centre on Beacon Park. So it's CTR Services, which is a security company, and Pink Office Supplies, which is an office supply company, and they also provide PPE as well. So they've started at Beacon Park, have now progressed, expanded, now building 2 new units on Beacon Park. And again, also the jobs going to local contractors to build those. And then the final piece in the jigsaw is the South Deans site. I've included CJAX there because that was actually the first business that was successful on our enterprise zone site back in 2012. So that was the first kind of success story for Yarmouth. There's others such as BH Bus, which is a Dutch-owned company as well, which has also expanded on South Deans. And obviously significant opportunity going forward for that supply chain as well. I won't go into this in any great detail, but there's because we've now come to the end of our kind of rate relief period, so there's no longer business rates released on offer to local companies. We've been working closely with our local authority colleagues to develop a new 5-year plan for growth for all of our enterprise zones. So we're pulling together Great Yarmouth Lowestoft with the other Space to Innovate sites as well, and realign this with the government's new plan for growth as well. With a much stronger flavour around clean growth and innovation, which is quite interesting to talk about that here in Yarmouth because you've been focused on clean growth and innovation for some time. But I will say that some other sites in Norfolk and Suffolk still are trying to sort of work out their position around this. But because of the focus on the offshore energy sector particularly, I think you've got a lot of headway in this. So we want to try and really position our enterprise-owned sites to focus more on supporting companies through maybe different grant programs on offer through government, which are coming from the clean growth and also innovation agendas. And so this is available on our website. There's an easy-to-read, downloadable strategic plan that covers 7 work streams, and there's new investment projects in the pipeline. But importantly, it strengthens that delivery with other partners, particularly the Growth Hub, the local authority economic development officers, the inward investment team within the LEP as well. There's been some great collaboration that's really come together, particularly during the COVID impact as well. I think there's actually been stronger collaboration probably over the last 18 months than there's ever been in some ways. And so this is our sort of new 5-year plan. And I will just touch on governance because it's something we obviously take very, very seriously. And again, I've worked very closely with colleagues here to ensure that we've got strong governance in place, not just through the reporting, but also around the financial sort of structures of enterprise zones, because they are sort of truly sort of public-private initiatives. And importantly, it does sort of support LEP priorities as well. And some of the retained business rates can actually go into supporting other programs. So I know you've got a presentation on the Generate branding this evening. That's a project that actually had some funding from the LEP, which originated from retained business rates from the enterprise zone. So you can see there's a wider picture here that we can actually generate, if you pardon the pun, opportunities for other projects across other areas as well. You won't be able to read this slide because it's too small, but I just wanted to just touch on the fact that the Great Yarmouth and Lowestoft enterprise zone is set in the sort of wider context of the energy coast, so Norfolk and Suffolk energy coast. So there's other sites obviously in Lowestoft that I've touched on, but also in North Norfolk as well. So there's a real sort of collaboration between promoting the sites in a more joined up way. And I just wanted to sort of finally touch on the sort of the jewel in the crown, if you like, for this enterprise zone, which is the O&M campus, which I'm sure members will be fully aware of and have seen the details and would have visited the site, no doubt. So there's a lot of work going on with the Great Yarmouth Borough and also Norfolk County Council at the moment in moving forward this project. There's obviously a £6 million grant through the Getting Building Fund via the LEP. But importantly, it's that retention of the enterprise zone business rates that has actually enabled this project to also move forward with support from the Borough and Norfolk County Council. And it's really positioning ourselves to maximise the opportunity from the offshore wind sector, particularly in the O&M space. And so not just for new inward investors, but also for regional offshore wind businesses that can basically scale up and reposition themselves here in Great Yarmouth as the UK centre of excellence for offshore wind. And there's obviously other opportunities as well, including the new business incubator plans as well to help strengthen the supply chain and start up businesses in the wider supply chain for the energy sector. So that's the partnership. As I mentioned, we cannot do this without the support from the borough, so I'm very much grateful for the support that we get from the officers here. And it's a really true sort of collaboration between the county councils and the district and borough councils. Happy to take any questions.
Lovely, thank you, Julian. Thank you for that presentation. Just a couple of questions from me before I bring in Trevor. Not questions, but we have pots A, B and C. That can you explain them a little bit to the members so they understand how this money that's brought in from the enterprise zone is divided between the various partners? Sure,
so there's every enterprise zone site, when the business rates are collected, they're split into effectively 3 pots. So pot A, which is shared between the county council and the borough council, and then pot B is used and retained to reinvest back into the site itself. So for example, the O&M campus, the investment from the retained rates comes from largely from pot B to help that project move forward. And then a proportion of the income also is pot C, which goes to the LEP, which we then use for our economic development programs, which local authorities can bid into to support other projects, which are non-enterprise zone related.
Okay, and I think picked up on that, just an average of 13% increase in employment and leveraging over £490 million in investment. Is there any chance of getting a copy of those slides?
Of course, yeah, that's fine.
Okay. Trevor?
I was going to say, is it possible to get these slides before we have the meeting? Because, I mean, you said about that slide with a little figure, I couldn't read any of it, none of it. You know, quite clearly it's here, so if we could have had it a few hours before, we could have read it. As it is, we're just looking at stuff which probably, certainly at the back here, I can't read any of it. And, you know, my eyes aren't that bad. So, you know, if we could just have these presentations, which we seem to get loads of, you know, in advance, basically. I'm not talking about weeks in advance, you know, the day before would be good. But that's just a point. But just on the jobs, we mention jobs a lot, and, you know, Beacon Park is doing extremely well. You touched on some figures, 1,000, 3,000, 1,000, you know, a lot of different figures. Most of the businesses on Beacon Park have relocated from other locations in the borough, such as ProServe, for an example. They amalgamated three sites into one on Beacon Park. How many actual new jobs have actually been created? Because if you go onto the Hertfordshire Industrial Estate now, some of it is like a wasteland, basically, because either the companies have gone skim or bust, or perhaps they've moved to Beacon Park. But are we just transferring jobs from one part of the borough so people can take advantage of the rates relief, which I understand is valuable to them? Are we actually creating any new jobs? You know, how many companies on Beacon Park on Beacon Park have come in from elsewhere, outside the borough? Is there any statistics on that? Mm-hmm. Because we talk about all these jobs, but most of them were in Yarmouth anyway.
So thanks for the question. This is something that government's taken very seriously in the last 2 rounds of enterprise zones. And that's the point about displacement. So there's no evidence of displacement within this particular enterprise zone. There has been some examples elsewhere in the country, and there's one company within Space to Innovate which is an example of displacement, but we've got no evidence of it happening in Great Yarmouth and Lowestoft. So those figures that I had up on the screen, I think it was 1,937 jobs. That's a net figure, so we don't include, if there's been a reduction in jobs, we do take that into account. So there's actually been more jobs counted, but sometimes businesses have actually downsized. There's one example in the last year where a company has downsized as a result of the impact on the oil and gas sector. So we only record net increase in jobs. Because it's very important, because enterprise zones should not be about moving companies from other sites within a locality, and that's something government takes very seriously and something that the LEP with the borough does as well.
Come back to that. I'm not talking about the council moving people from one site to another. I'm saying people are moving because they've taken advantage of the business rates relief, which is understandable. But you talk about these. There are businesses being displaced. They've gone to Beacon Park, and I can take you around Hertfordshire now and show some sites where those businesses, they're empty. There's nobody in them. So, it's a great success. Don't get me wrong, Beacon Park. And when we were in control from 12 to 15, we actually did the speculative build to make sure companies came on there. Yeah. Because when we took over, it was wasteland. So I'm pleased it's doing well, but I sometimes don't buy this, that all these companies are going over there, creating loads of jobs. Well, I say, have a drop before, I don't quite know where you come from, but actually have a drive around Hertfordshire and have a look at all the empty industrial units. And a lot of those units actually went to Beacon, a lot of those businesses went to Beacon Park.
Well, I think those businesses that were emptied, smaller businesses came in and took up the empty businesses. There's always been empty businesses on Beacon Park, but other businesses take up where the bigger businesses have moved on from. So it's a revolving door, and I really don't understand where you're coming from, Trevor. At the end of the day, we've just now been told that we have over 1,900 jobs, and you're not happy with it. You'd rather see something else. It just bewilders me, honestly.
Sorry, Mr. Chairman.
I'm sorry, Trevor, but that is true.
I'm not saying that whatsoever.
Yes, you are saying that.
No, I'm not. I'm pleased Beacon Park's doing well. What I'm saying is there's a lot of businesses that are relocated to Beacon Park from the Borough of Great Yarmouth
And
within
those
it.
empty premises have been refilled with smaller businesses.
Well,
That's how it works.
I'll take you around Hertfordshire tomorrow and you can have a look. I bet you've never gone on Hertfordshire to have a look.
I have been on Harfreys. I am on there daily, and yes, there's businesses that are empty, but there's also churn. And at the end of the day, businesses come and businesses go. And there's always been empty places on Beacon Park, on Harfreys, always.
Can I just say, though, don't put words into my mouth that I'm not happy with what's going on. Far from it. I'm pleased that it's successful.
I'm glad for that. That's
No,
good.
no, but don't put words in my mouth. This meeting's being live streamed. So
I
please
appreciate
don't
it is.
put words in my mouth that I'm not saying.
Thank you. Tony.
Yeah, just really, that was one of the questions. I mean, there's a question that I've asked on numerous occasions because, yes, I mean, it's you could headline news that it's 1,937 jobs that have been created or protected in that area, and it's good news because obviously, you know, when we look at the Beacon Park itself, it was fortuitous that we had a council at the time that looked forward to this type of project coming up, and you know, it's been there for nearly 20 years, or probably over 20 years now, and now there are a number of businesses on there, which is a huge success, and I think it's true to say that probably some of the companies that have moved on to the site probably may well have been looking to other areas had we not had the Beacon Park site. So I think in that particular area, one of my concerns is the same as what Trevor has said. It's the figures that are bandied around that this created 1,937 jobs. I think we have to accept that a significant number of those have actually moved from small businesses, because I know businesses that have consolidated into one business, moved out of the town buildings that they had and moved on to that site. Now, that's no bad thing because it protects those jobs, but I think we should be realistic about this, because the same thing was said when we developed the Outer Harbour. It was going to create 1,000 to 1,200 jobs. So on that basis, we should have 3,000 new jobs. When I go on the ONS site, which looks at the number of jobs that we have in the town, they have not moved for the last 10 years. They're exactly the same as they were before. So when you look at the figures, I think, yes, it is good headline figures. The Beacon Park is a success. It's a huge success. There's no question about that. The Outer Harbour is a success. There's no question about it. But I think we should be realistic about the fact that there are jobs that have been moved to there, and we should have a look at those lists. And I was just wondering whether or not there was actually somewhere available to count the jobs. We must have a list somewhere, and I've probably asked this before, where we can sort of signify the businesses that are on the site and how many jobs that have been, how many jobs are actually in that particular business. Not the new jobs, but the number of jobs that are in those businesses. I would like to see if there is such a list for that. One of my other bugbears is, and you mentioned about the enterprise zone, the fact that it's coming to an end now, I believe you said, didn't you?
The rate relief period has come to an end, yeah.
Does that mean then that any new businesses that may want to move on to the enterprise zone area will not get that attraction of the rate relief?
That's correct.
And there's no going to be a second tranche of that?
There's no replacement for that scheme, confirmed by government just yet.
Right. And you mentioned the three pots that there are where the rates go into. That will continue for how long?
So that's 25 years overall. So that's another, my maths is not that good, so it's another 16 years.
About another 16 years. Mm. So for 16 years we'll be able to get the benefit of those pots?
That's correct, yeah.
Okay, that's fair enough. But, you know, I don't think, Chairman, you should be saying or even suggesting that any of our side actually opposes, because, as I said, we actually developed the Beacon Park. We put Beacon Park, and believe you me, there was opposition from the opposition party at that particular time that we had to fight through, where we compulsory purchased some of the land down there. So I won't have it that we're opposed to this, because we welcome any industry within the town, because even today we have still got the highest unemployment levels in the eastern region and in the top 20 in the country. So yes, it is a good thing. I'm glad that we had the foresight to actually develop something of that nature, and I'm glad now that we've got these businesses there. But as I said, I don't think we should kid ourselves that they are brand new jobs that have come in here. I think we all accept that a number of those jobs have moved from within the borough to new sites in there, and we should get on with that. So, you know, let's just all say, yes, we welcome this opportunity that we've got here on the enterprise zone. It's a pity that's going to end, because I think but this may well stagnate at this time. But hopefully the money that we get from these that goes into the pot can be reinvested to give other companies the opportunity to move into the town and support jobs for local people, which I think is the most important thing. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Tony. Julian, when you say net number of jobs, what do you mean by that?
So we record, every quarter we get in touch with all the companies. We record exactly what their job figures are at that moment. So if they've decreased, we actually have to record that. So we only actually record what the increase has been over the period of the 9 years since the enterprise zone has been established. And I should have pointed out it's jobs created and safeguarded. I think the gentleman here used the term safeguard, and it's a really important point in this because there is a risk of businesses moving out of areas. And you know what the enterprise zone has helped do, I think, is cement them into the local supply chain and safeguarded those jobs locally. So we do record that as part of the jobs figures, and I think that's a really important point to reference.
It is an important point, thank you. It's one I wanted to make clear. Thank you. Brian.
By trying to make Trevor look bad by making a Boris-type statement. That's totally unfounded. Because Tony was right, it was the Labour Party in this town that decided to forge ahead with Beacon Park. It great opposition to the Conservative Party at the time. They wanted nothing to do with it. They thought it would run the place down and make it into another industrial estate. But they didn't have the vision. They didn't have the vision. And I always remember, just before the Innovation Centre opened, we lost control. And one of the first things Barry Stone done as chairman of economic development was go along there and officially open it. And if you'd heard what he said about it, how great and innovative it was, how it was the way forward, how it was going to be the future, and Yarmouth was at the forefront. But he didn't mention the Labour Party. They took all the plunders for it, whatever. And I think it's a disgrace what you just said to Trevor.
Thank you. I have Daniel Camden.
Thank you, Chairman. First of all, fantastic presentation. I think the key word, and yourself touched on it just a minute ago, safeguarding. It's a common reaction of a successful local economy that small businesses need to move to larger premises because they bring additional jobs. So, I'm really glad if small businesses have to move to the enterprise zone into bigger premises and bring in further skills and trades for local people. Just touching on the comment Councillor Wright made regarding the unemployment, he states that ours is significantly higher in the east, but from the figures I see, the trends match nationally. The numbers might be slightly different, but dips and rises match exactly what's happening in all the rest of the country. And Great Yarmouth has a set of complex and interrelated challenges to deal with that many other seaside coastal towns don't have to deal with. So there is a slight difference there. And then finally, Mr. Chairman, some councillors are arguing over who's going to take the credit maybe for this sort of project, but it's all right building empty buildings, putting jobs in them buildings and bringing further investment into the local economy is exactly what this administration has done, and that is the fact of the matter.
Thank you, Councillor. Colleen?
Thank you, Chairman, and thank you for the presentation. Could I ask, I assume it's relevant, how many of those jobs you're talking about are full-time equivalents? How many of them are apprenticeships? And if you have any apprenticeships?
So they're all full-time equivalent posts. So we measure that number that I quoted, full-time equivalents. We don't record through the enterprise zone data the number of apprenticeships, unfortunately. I mean, we might be able to get access through that through our skills team, but we don't record that through the enterprise zones. So government have asked for a number of indicators, so jobs numbers, number of businesses supported, land developed, investment levels. So they're the ones that we record for the enterprise zones.
Could I just ask, given that Norfolk County Council are pushing apprenticeships, if we can see that that can be part of your summary in future about apprenticeships, because they're the way forward. They're the people that we're going to look at for full-time trade and skills at a later date. So I think it's information that we do require.
Yeah, I understand that, but as Julian just said, he's not asked by government to keep that information. That's kept in a separate portfolio from himself, but he can certainly pass that on to his colleague, who would be more than willing to give you those figures.
Just very quickly, just to clarify what I'd said, Chairman, if I may, just what Daniel had mentioned there. I do accept that there is this trend nationally in terms of employment and unemployment, and coastal towns have suffered more than most areas. I do accept that. My point is that Great Yarmouth is the highest in the eastern region for unemployment at 6.5%, whereas let's take Brentwood, for instance, they're 4%. In the country, out of all of the local authorities, we are the 18th highest unemployment in the whole of this country. That was my point. And as far as jobs density is concerned, in 2010 there were 46,000 jobs. In 2013, 44,000 jobs. And 2019, 43,000 jobs. That is the government's figures. So my point was that, yes, we do have these jobs, but I think we should be truthful to everybody to say, yes, they have safeguarded the jobs, and I think that is vitally important. But we portray this as these brand new jobs that have come out, and they aren't. I think we should accept that there are some new jobs there. I don't know how we would extrapolate the fact, how many there are. But quite clearly, there are safeguarded jobs. There are jobs that have been moved because of the size of the industry. So it's a complicated sum that we have to come to. But we shouldn't get away from the fact that we have got particular problems in Great Yarmouth, more than most towns in the eastern region, certainly, and certainly on a par with the worst on a country basis. But I did point out at the last meeting, one of our serious issues that we have is that we are bottom of the list for skills. We're 476 out of 476. And what I'm trying to say is that there is a job to be done. And yes, the LEP are doing well. They're promoting and obviously supporting the growth that we're going to be seeing within the offshore wind industry. But let's just don't kid ourselves that this is going to create opportunities for the many thousands or hundreds of people that are unemployed within the borough. So it's just about being truthful about what we've actually created here, but also what we've safeguarded and what we hope to create in the future.
Thank you, Tony. I think that's a really important point you make there about the deprivation which you've had for over 20 years now in this particular town. And I think the work that's going on at the moment with the enterprise zone, with the enterprise partnerships that we have going on with the LEP, everybody's focused on trying to get those skill levels up. Everybody's focused on trying to get jobs into the borough, and we are spending a lot of money on infrastructure to try and make that happen. But there's also other work going on in the background as well to try and increase those job levels. So I totally agree with what you're saying. It's what we are entirely focused on, is to try and make, is to upskill the workforce we have, put skills in the direction of the children and help them get into work and get into jobs. And I think that what we're doing with the LEP and what we're doing with the County Council and what we're doing with the industrial strategy is trying to turn that around. And it's like turning a barge. You know that yourself. You've been here many years, and it's difficult, but there are many plans in place to try and turn it around for the people of the borough. David?
Thank you, Chairman. Just a couple of points to add to the presentation. I mean, you're quite right about the infrastructure. Obviously, the Third of a Crossing project is well underway, due to be completed in the spring of 23. which gives you direct access to the South Deans enterprise zone and better connects the two that we have within our borough. But the points of clarity I wanted to raise was the local development order that was mentioned. Obviously, that gives you a very streamlined planning process. That's due to run out in April and May next year. Just so that members are aware, we're already working on a revision of those LDOs, and that'll come back to members for consideration as to whether or not they want to extend what is a very significant incentive to developers currently. So that work is currently underway, and the operations and maintenance base that was mentioned in the presentation, obviously demolition works have, within the last week or so, have started, and that is a significant project for the offshore sector. And members will be given an update report at the next meeting in the early part of September. So you'll have a full report on progress with that particular project and maybe an insight as to some of the investment that's being attracted at the moment. I just wanted to raise that whilst it was mentioned at this meeting. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. And hopefully members will accept an extension to the LDO, because it does mean an awful lot to Great Yarmouth to make sure we have a local development order in place. Paul.
Yes, thank you, Chair. As the LEP say, they write to each business quarterly to get... I can't hear you. Oh, sorry. As the LEP say, they write to each business quarterly at present to get updates on numbers. Could they not ask how many jobs they had pre-move on their books and how many post-move? So we would then have an indication of how many new jobs were actually created. And it would be very simple. All they've got to do is look at their payroll and say, we employed 1,000 pre-move, we now employ 1,030. And we would then have a figure that would keep everyone happy, and we would know exactly what we have created going forward for the investment.
I'll direct that to...
So, that's a good suggestion, actually. I mean, some local authorities have looked at this more deeply, so they have actually done their own analysis because they're local businesses, so they're quite close to them, so they've actually done their own research. I'll have a look at what data we've collected over the past 9 years, and I'll try my best to drill down as much as I can, provide the officers here with that information. Happy to bring that back to members if that's of use. But obviously you're more than welcome to kind of do more in-depth analysis of your local companies, local surveys. I know the borough here, you've got a very close working relationship with your local businesses, and you've done lots of surveys recently as well, so you may be able to pull that data out from other sources, actually. I guess what I'm saying, you might actually have a more effective database than what the LEP has, because we've actually been tracking this over a 9-year period, and you've actually done some more recent surveys because of the COVID impact as well.
Okay, Paul, we'll see if we can get that information and bring it.
Because that would be good for everyone going forward. Yep. Thank you.
Okay. Michelle?
Appreciate I'm taking this back slightly, but I just wanted to respond to your comment around skills, which we absolutely understand is a key issue. We have submitted an application to the Community Renewal Fund, not an insignificant request of funding, and in the appraisal process we were fortunate enough to come top of the pile. That's now with central government to do their appraisal process, and we should hear before summer recess as to whether we've been successful. But the intention for that is to look at the skills pathways of young people into key sector industries of the borough. So whilst we have some very well-paid individuals in the borough, many of them don't live here, and we completely understand and accept that that's an issue that we're trying to resolve. So by developing the infrastructure in terms of the learning campus in the town, plus the wraparound support that we want to provide, understanding what the journeys look like and where any of those pathways are broken, how we can implement change and projects to perhaps bridge those things to enable young people to access these types of jobs in the long term is something that we're trying to rectify. So whilst of course we'd love to go quicker, that is the current state of play, and I just thought that might be helpful to respond to your comment.
Thank you. Much appreciated. Colleen?
Could I just ask, has anybody taken into consideration the impact of furlough coming to an end? Because a lot of these companies have been totally reliant on furlough during what I'm sure it's going to have an impact. what kind of impact, the amount of people that will lose their jobs, we don't know. But are we looking at the impact that this is going to have?
Again, another very good question. It's not something we would record through our standard enterprise zone data collection, but there's a lot of work with the LEP and the County Council and the local districts at the moment looking at the furlough data, so it's something that we're very much mindful of. Whether we've got that tracked down to specific sites and enterprise zone sites, I don't think we have that, but certainly at a borough level you would be able to have some information on that.
So we do have the furlough numbers by district and borough authority, and I know that the LEP are looking at their Renew plan, which is looking to take their recovery plan and also elements of their economic strategy to move that forward. One of your officers at the LEP is looking at furlough. I'm not sure whether they've got an understanding of what will happen when should that end, but Julian, I think at Simon Papworth we could ask him the question.
Thank you. Right, thank you for that, Julian. That's been obviously a very interesting presentation, and a lot of people are obviously interested in it, but I thank you for that, and hopefully we'll see you again in about 6 months' time, and we'll understand the situation then as well.
Appreciate that.
Thank you very much. Item 6 is the offshore wind competitive project called Generate. It's on page 13. And it says it provides officers with an update on the Norfolk and Suffolk offshore wind competitive positioning programme. It seeks to develop and deploy a coherent, coordinated and collectively owned brand, offer, identity and marketing strategy to complement other strategic and capital initiatives and drive energy sector investments. Michelle, is this with you to present?
Yes, it is. Unfortunately, Sarah can't be here this evening, so I'm going to present her paper for her. I'm just going to very briefly go over the cover paper without going into too much detail and then provide a presentation. More than happy to skip through that fairly quickly because I appreciate what comments we've had earlier, but it might be helpful to actually see the journey of the brand in the film that we have, and I can of course circulate that afterwards. Regrettably, unfortunately, it seems that the marketing strategy was not circulated with the paper, and so that will need to follow separately, and unfortunately we won't be able to sign off recommendation 2 as a result, but I will go through the process and to just assure or reassure members that the cover paper does highlight the key elements of the strategy itself, but of course we will circulate that separately. So just briefly, you will have remembered from the, I think,
Michelle, before you go on, is this time sensitive? Is there an urgency about it?
Well, certainly having your endorsement of the brand itself, so the image, the logo, the website and the prospectus, ideally, yes, because we would like to launch that at Global Offshore Wind. But the strategy itself is a long-term document that picks up the planning of events in the long term, so it's less important.
Okay, thank you.
So just to be clear though, the strategy and the brand is actually collectively owned. It's for both Great Yarmouth and East Suffolk really primarily and the organisations within it, both the county councils, Norfolk, Suffolk and the local districts and boroughs, to bring this brand together and collectively launch it, use it and promote it for inward investment opportunities. The All Energy Industry Council is the overseeing body that will ensure that it gains traction in all of the right places, including central government. So the paper itself goes through a bit of a background and the purpose of the brand. Many members, I'm sure, will remember the East of England Energy Zone, the EEZ is what we fondly called it as, was meant to be a temporary brand, and I think over a period of time and through feedback from the private sector, not least Ørsted themselves suggested it might be something we would want to refresh and bring together in a very similar way to some of the other competing brands across the country, such as Aura. So we wanted to ensure that we could use this brand to promote and maximise supply chain opportunities, strengthening both the Great Yarmouth and East Suffolk areas as key hubs of expertise, obviously attracting new inward investment, and we are already seeing traction with that through the O&M campus and other strategic infrastructure, and also encourage growth across the enterprise zones or other business parks to prioritise the offshore renewable sector and broader energy sector as a whole. So the paper itself goes through some of the purpose of that, the brand, the values, and some of the key messaging. And I'd like to draw your attention in particular to the box that's just above 3.10 that focuses on the awareness, the stakeholder engagement and lead generation that we'll all sign up to as a partnership across the broader area I've mentioned. This has gone through a significant amount of consultation. All of those sat around the All Energy Industry Council, central government, businesses outside of the area, and of course local government. So it has taken quite a while to get to where we are, but we do have a brand that everybody now endorses. I think the important thing to know, and unfortunately is lacking because you haven't got the strategy, is what the outcomes of this particular brand will deliver. And we do want to ensure that KPIs and monitoring are recorded so that we know what events we go to, whether they've been successful, what leads they've generated, and what jobs and income, economic growth that's delivered. We want to make sure that the events that we attend are actually value for money for both the enterprise zone and the people that are attending it. So I think that pretty much covers off the cover paper. I do just want to give a presentation which shows you the journey of the brand itself, and I think that would be quite helpful if you don't mind helping me, Production Bureau, to get that up on the screen. Thank you. So this is what Generate has come about to achieve. So I will explore how we've moved from EEZ to the Generate brand, but we wanted to make sure that it was bold, it was simple, obviously had to reflect the East, and we've worked deeply with the LEP to make sure that it complements the Norfolk and Suffolk Unlimited branding. And whilst the logos aren't similar, the colourways, have been aligned to ensure that they do work together. And the LEP have been fully involved in this in the process. We wanted to make sure that it was modern, obviously visual, that it could be tailored for each energy sector. So you might want to go to an oil and gas exhibition that might need to look slightly different. You might go to a marine energy exhibition that might need to pull out different colours or just use certain elements of the logo rather than the full wording in itself. I think if I press this button, you should see a small video of how we've transitioned from EEZ. I hope, yeah. So this is what it looked like before, with the dots, and this is what it should look like now. So we're trying to pull out the East, the E's that kind of, the letter E that goes thread through the word Generate, and we were really clear we needed to make an emphasis of the East of England, because if you're going to an event in Scotland or in Europe, you needed to make sure that people could situate where we were. I think that covers that. And the colours themselves, we needed to represent a variety of energy. So you've got land-based energy, you've got sea-based energy, and also obviously the renewables, both wind on land and offshore. So when we were talking with central government, the message that we got back was, okay, so what exactly has the East of England got to offer over and above either Aberdeen or the Humber or somewhere else? So whilst you're not going to be able to see this, and I do accept that the writing is too small for everybody, I will make sure this is circulated afterwards. These messages are really for the council or other organisations to liaise with an inward investor or central government, or developing a funding bid, for example, to explore and explain what the USPs are for the area. So it might be, for example, here, how many gigawatts we've got for offshore wind, what input that generates or output that generates, and of course the economic return. After this presentation, I will just show you what the prospectus looks like. On that middle image, you will see the East of England with a number of numbered dots. The prospectus then shows you exactly what that numbered dot represents, whether that is an onshore wind farm, whether it's an offshore wind farm, whether it's oil and gas, could be on land gas, it could be any of those types of energy information pages that loops through to the prospectus, and we would obviously use that for all variety of purposes at exhibitions or for funding bids. The website itself will of course be our shopfront, and will have facts and opportunities regularly updated as and when they need to be. It will be a living web page, and this is what we will use primarily to liaise with businesses both inside Great Yarmouth and East Suffolk, but also outside as well. So we have a video here which shows you all the different ways the material could be seen at both websites and events, and I will hopefully you'll be able to see this.
The East of England has been at the forefront of the UK's energy transition. Driven by
and clearly, obviously, it's not just about energy, it will also be about sustainability, the low carbon agenda, net zero, what we're able to actually put into the grid, the skills that will need to be provided to generate the energy and sustain that in the area in the long term. We played around with whether it should just be about renewable energy, but because the importance of the broader energy sector in the supply chain impacts us so significantly, we've opened it up to cover oil and gas as well, not least because we've got our operations and maintenance campus coming on stream that will cover all energy.
This is Generate, your gateway and partner for the energy sector in the East of England. Go to generateenergy.co.uk to discover.
So this is something that's picked out in the paper, so I won't dwell on this. This is, I think it's identified under section 3.9, so you won't need to read through all of this, but this is the brand purpose and what we're trying to achieve with it. And again, in the same box, it explains exactly what we're trying to do to deliver the vision, and that's making sure that our name is top and centre of mind when it comes to central government, and we're continuously pressing the flesh when it comes to all of the impact of the energy sector. For example, we're using it at the moment to prioritise knowledge around Sizewell C. Appreciate that that's not necessarily in Great Yarmouth, but with the volume of jobs that are potentially as an outcome of that particular project, it will benefit Great Yarmouth. So these are the next steps in terms of practical projects. We've mentioned the O&M campus. We want to develop that prospectus to share. We also want to develop an invest in GY type website, so inward investors actually know what we've got going on here, the infrastructure that's coming on stream with the town deal, and also the infrastructure with the third river crossing. And I've already mentioned the measures and KPIs, so we want to make sure that the leads that are generated are being mapped and tracked, and that we know what the outcomes are, because we won't know that if we don't understand who's taking them on board and what jobs are being created as a result of those conversations. I think I'll leave that there in terms of the presentation. Could I just ask to have the prospectus up? I won't dwell on it for too long, but it would be great if I could just share what that looks like. Excellent. So this was on one of the slides. I appreciate it was very small, so you won't be able to see a huge amount of detail, and we will share this afterwards. This is the chair of the All Energy Industry Council, obviously making a statement, and these are all of the assets that we have across the whole of the Norfolk and Suffolk area. We've got content from a variety of businesses and statements from key strategic investors, the LEP as well, and that will cover all of the Norfolk and Suffolk area. Port-related activity will be critical, and we're liaising with Peel ports, of course, but also Lowestoft Port as well. And then under each of the subsections or the double-page spreads, we've got a focus on each of the energies. Offshore wind being one of the key ones, gas I mentioned, and it goes on through nuclear too. I'll just skip through them because there's a lot of detail in there, but I thought that might be helpful to see. And of course, once that's been printed and you're able to access a copy, we would be happy to share it. And skills being a key point too. And just to show you that we are a partnership, we've got all of our logos on there, and we are very grateful to the LEP to fund a huge proportion of this project, so thank you. At that point, I'll pass to questions. Thank
you. It does seem the culmination of many years of work that's been going on to try and sell the East Coast as an energy coast, and obviously now a brand and a logo will be helpful and useful when talking about all the different kinds of energies that we're going to do as well. I didn't hear anything about decommissioning, but I suppose that's another green energy sector element. Again, it's one of those things where we've been looking to the future for so long now, and we're now at a point where we need to be selling this particular area out in the wide world, and to get that, you need a brand and a logo. So I accept that the need is there, and that the brand and the logo is what it is. Has any members got any comments to make? Daniel?
Thank you, Chairman. I just got 2 points to bring up, but just before I do, I just wanted to kind of echo an earlier comment Trevor made regarding the presentations. I appreciate you're going to share them with us in the future, the annexes and that, but it really is important that we have these presentations shared with us beforehand, as well as presenting them, because it allows members to prepare some deeper questions on matters. So, and I think that applies across the board on all committees. So if we could just take that going forward, that would be great. I saw in point 4 of the report on next steps, it says a proposal of 6 monthly biannual update reports to be made to the Economic Development Committee. I'm just wondering, because of the importance of this project and the fact that we, you know, the energy sector is so important to us, that I think maybe increasing them reports to maybe a 4 monthly triannual reports back to members, I think might be better. Other members may think differently, but I appreciate that quarterly might be a bit too much, but just if we could update it to 3 reports a year rather than 2, due to the importance of the subject. And also, lastly, I saw you're going to be supplying fact sheets on projects for central government agencies. Will members have access and be supplied with them fact sheets for all relevant projects?
If I work backwards through your question, so yes, they wouldn't be available online because they'll be regularly updated, but as soon as we've got them, we can share them internally. There's nothing confidential in there, it's just factual information. I think the resource to keep that regularly updated online would be too frequent, but once they're done, we can share them with you. That's not a problem. In terms of the triennial, yes, that's absolutely fine. I think it would be helpful if we could give you an update of the events that we're going to and the outcomes from it. They'd probably be quite brief, but it wouldn't be a problem at all. And I completely accept your point about the presentation, and we will, of course, take that on board in future meetings, and I do apologise.
Thank you, Michelle. The only reason I asked was it just allows members to have their finger on the pulse a bit more with that and the fact sheets, and supplying information to people who ask us just generally what's going on with this project. We have further details to hand to give them. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. I think expanding on that, Michelle, if at some point we could have a crib sheet of what's happening just for all members of the Economic Development Committee, I think that would be really useful, just so that everybody's aware of what's happening and what stages we're at with these processes as well. I think that would be really important. And I think Daniel makes a really good point. I mean, it is disappointing we didn't have the pack. Because it does say in here there's appendices, and then when you try and hunt for them, you wonder whether it's yourself not being able to find it by hitting the wrong button or something, or if they're just not there, but they just simply weren't there. And that's not your fault, I know, but I think it just needs to be echoed what the councillor said, is that we do need this information in front of us if we're going to make these kind of decisions. So thank you for taking that on board. Appreciate that. I'm not seeing any other hands up. There's 3 recommendations on page 17. Recommendation 2 we'll leave out today, but recommendation 1 is to review, comment upon the content of the report, noting the process, and 3, endorse the proposal for officers to begin to focus on individual projects. Is everybody all right with those recommendations? I am seeing nodding heads, so that's thank you very much. And thank you for the presentation. We now move on to item 7, which is Transport East Transport Strategy, and a presentation will be given by Andrew Summers. I believe we're going to get in contact with him and have him on screen, are we? Is that right?
Yes, he's there now.
Oh, there he is. Hello, Andrew.
Good evening, everyone. Hope you're all well. And I assume you can all hear me okay. So, thank you for having me. I'm Andrew Summers, Strategic Director of Transport East. We're the subnational transport body for Norfolk, Suffolk, Essex, Southend and Thurrock. I'm here today to talk through the work that Transport East is doing. Great Yarmouth, obviously one of the key members of Transport East, and I'd like to get your views on transport priorities for the East of England, Norfolk and Great Yarmouth. My colleague Neil from the Production Bureau will be sharing the slides. Neil, can you put the slide deck up, please, and go through to the first slide? Excellent, thank you very much. So what I'd like to talk through is to update you on the emerging national and subnational transport strategies that are currently being developed, and secure your views on transport strategy and investment priorities for the East of England. I'm going to run through the national context first and the role of Transport East before going on to our transport challenges, our emerging strategy, and talk about the next steps. Neil, can you switch slides, please? So I'm going to start at the national context, and an awful lot happening at national government level. Transport East, as a subnational transport body, is very DfT focused, so Department for Transport. We've had a number of meetings with the DfT's ministerial team over the last 6 months. They've written to us recently to give us our grant for this financial year, and they've set out 4 priorities, and ourselves, Norfolk and Great Yarmouth, should be mindful of these priorities as we develop our case for investment. So DfT's priorities this year: improving connectivity to grow and level up the economy, decarbonising transport, improving transport for the user, and also increasing the UK's global impact. So the work that we do collectively needs to take that into account. On the right-hand side, you can see there's an awful lot of activity currently taking place at national government level from a transport perspective. Virtually every mode and outcome has been subject to a major strategy, white paper or plan over the last 6 months. And our job collectively is to make sure we're getting the best deal for the East of England from that. So back in 2020, we had emergency COVID response. The National Infrastructure Strategy was published in November. Good news for Great Yarmouth with the third river crossing within that. And then from that, we've had policies on active travel, on bus back better, on the future of rural mobility and free ports. And again, good news for the East of England in terms of getting 2 free ports here. Over the last few weeks, we've seen the William Shapps rail plan being published, the biggest transformation in the rail industry over the last 25 years, creating great British railways and bringing the rail and operators together into one organisation. And then last week, we had the Transport Decarbonisation Plan published, which set out the government's approach to decarbonising transport. But looking ahead, we've got the comprehensive spending review coming up this autumn, potentially a 3-year settlement. We need to make sure we're getting the best deal for the East from that for transport. And then also kicking off in the autumn is RIS3, so the Highways England route strategies. Highways England will be doing a series of engagement on the next generation of transport highway priorities for the East of England, and Transport East will be key to working with them to do that. So with all of that taking place, it's key that we have a subnational transport body that works together to oversee this. Neil, can you move on to the next slide, please? So this is why Transport East was formed. Transport East was formed in 2018 to provide a single voice for transport investment for the East of England. We're one of 7 subnational transport bodies across England. You can see on the map there the relative geographies of all of them. It's needed to work at a large strategic scale to get that voice across to government of the investment that we need. So Transport East comprises colleagues from Norfolk all the way down to Thurrock and Southend. We have the 5 transport authorities on board, as well as 24 district authorities. And it's worth pausing there to reflect that Great Yarmouth is currently leading the Norfolk District's representation on Transport East. So Councillor Plant is the Norfolk District's rep on Transport East, and David, as an officer support, provides significant support for the Transport East partnership. We also have the 2 LEPs, so New Anglia LEP and CELEP, and the 3 Chambers of Commerce across Norfolk, Suffolk and Essex. And we have Highways England, Network Rail and DfT, as well as neighbouring authorities. And our remit is clear. We've come together to speak with one voice for our subnational area. We need to develop a transport strategy and advise government on priorities. And these are clear messages that have come through from the Minister on what we need to be doing to get more investment in the East. We want to accelerate and improve delivery and work beyond boundaries. So thinking of the East not just as an island, but a key part of the national UK economy. And the activity that takes place in places like Great Yarmouth and Norfolk, absolutely fundamental to the rest of the country, but we need that infrastructure investment to be able to deliver that. So Neil, can you move on to the next slide, please? So the Transport East Partnership has set out its first business plan. We formed in 2018, and over the last year, we've put together a small staff team, of which I am the first member of staff, but we have a number of other colleagues as well, to create our business plan. We're funded both by local authority partners and also the Department for Transport. This is our first plan, published in June 2021. It's in your information pack. This year, we've secured over £500,000 from the government to drive forward the work, and it's clear what government wants us to do. This year, they want us to produce a sub-national transport strategy and set of priorities to advise the Secretary of State on what transport we want delivered in the East of England. Alongside that key piece of work, we also want to accelerate the investment and business cases for funding. So that funding is also going towards how we accelerate delivery of those priorities. And also, interestingly, for this part of the world, we have assumed the national rural mobility lead across all of those subnational transport bodies across England. So, aided by Norfolk County Council, we are driving forward the national debate on rural mobility. So, Neil, can you pass to the next slide, please? So, what is our fundamental argument? We want to make the East compete with those other regions. Now, we've seen the success that places like the North, the Midlands have had over the last 5 to 6 years in terms of getting their message across to government and getting investment. And we need for transport to have that similar type of ammunition, that advocacy. And we've got an incredible case for investment. 3.5 million people, 76 towns and cities, a 74 billion economy, indeed, a net contributor to the exchequer. A key gateway region, 13 ports and 3 airports. And as we've already talked about at this region, this meeting, UK's premier energy region. We also have a range of other skills, so diverse economic strengths, green energy, agriculture, and many others. And we need to make sure that they're at the forefront of our forthcoming transport strategy. But there's a range of challenges. And Neil, can you move on to the next slide, please, just to show what these are? We've done a lot of engagement with partners over the last 6 months, and it's clear that some of the messages coming back point to a real need for investment in our transport network. So in the East, we need to improve capacity, resilience, frequency, and connectivity, particularly east-west. So connecting our part of England to the Midlands, to the North, to London, absolutely fundamental that we get that investment in strategic connectivity, and that's come through very strongly from our engagement both with the likes of yourselves, MPs, and the public. We need to better connect our ports to the UK destinations. A key theme of the DFT at present is UK connectivity, and we need to make sure we're getting good access from our international gateways through to those other parts of England that are areas for trading, both imports and exports. But it's not only national. We need to improve accessibility to jobs, education and services, particularly in our rural and coastal areas. And of all the regions across England, all of the strategies that are being developed, I think it's in our region that message needs to come across most strongly. It's been one of the most powerful messages that's come through the engagement so far. And we also need to tackle high emissions from our transport network. We're one of the leading regions in terms of actual carbon emissions from transport. And part of our work is how do we tackle decarbonisation in a particularly challenging region such as ours with a lot of rural movement. So Neil, can we move on to the next slide, please? This really tees up what Transport East is going to be doing over the next year before we move into the more detailed work on the strategy. So there's 3 things that we're really looking to do for our business plan. Firstly, clarify our single voice priorities across the region. Now, the single voice bit is absolutely fundamental. Those other parts of England have come together as subnational areas to clearly articulate their priorities. Our challenge here is to do the same, working with our partners in other local authorities, in LEPs and Chambers of Commerce, to really set out what the East of England wants. We're doing that by developing a transport strategy this year and a pipeline of investment priorities. We're then going to set out our case for investment. We need confidence from government that our priorities can be delivered. A number of elements here. We need longer term funding settlements, and we need better funding mechanisms and appraisal within central government that value the outcomes that we want to see delivered here. A lot of government transport appraisal is predicated on investment in metropolitan, in large urban areas. And part of our challenge as a region here is to change that. And then thirdly, we need to communicate that single voice. As a region, we've been quite quiet in the past. We're having an advocacy plan developing. We had a round table with our region's MPs a few months ago, which one or two of you were at as well. We're getting geared up for CSR 21, the Comprehensive Spending Review, to make sure that our priorities are coming through to government. So how are we going to do this, and how can you get involved in this? So Neil, can we move on to the next slide, please? So the way in which we need to do this is to develop a clear transport strategy for the East of England, and that's what we're doing. Baroness Beer, who's the Minister for Roads, Buses and Places, spoke at our Regional Transport Summit back in March and has since written to us that we need to be laser focused on two core functions. That is developing and maintaining a transport strategy and providing advice on priorities to the Secretary of State. If we have that framework in place, the noises from government are that it's going to be much easier for us to secure investment and have that single voice advocacy. So we're developing this. We're developing that strategic case for transport. It's going to tackle local and national outcomes. It's going to be informed by a robust evidence base and engagement with local authorities, businesses, ports, airports, operators, public, and many others. And it's going to set out clear delivery priorities. Now, I'll come on to the details later, but we're going to go to public consultation in the autumn on this, and then submit this by the end of the financial year. Within the business plan that you've got, this is the fundamental piece of work that we're doing. So Neil, can you move on to the next slide, please? So this sets out what that draft transport strategy is likely to say. This is the culmination of a lot of technical work over the last 6 months and engagement with many partners. We need to set out a clear narrative. So a thriving economy for the East, fast, reliable and resilient transport infrastructure with a future of inclusive and sustainable growth for decades to come. The fast, reliable and resilient is fundamental here, particularly as an area with a lot of peripheral parts. We need that fast connectivity to the rest of the UK. 4 key themes have come out of the work, and these are going to underpin our transport strategy. So decarbonisation, connecting our growing towns and cities, energised coastal and rural communities, and unlocking our international gateways. And these are the 4 key messages that we need to get across to government for the East of England. So Neil, can you move on to the next slide, please? And I'll just run through these in turn. So decarbonisation. Transport's actually the largest contributor in the East of England to carbon emissions. So 41% of all our region's emissions come from transport. That's higher than many other regions, where the average across England is about 26%. A significant proportion of that come from road, unsurprising in our region, where the passenger transport network is quite sparse and a lot of rural population. Our challenge here is quite unique. How do we tackle that? So there's 4 broad solutions here that we're looking at in terms of our toolkit that's going to be articulated in more detail in the strategy. Firstly, low carbon planning developments. So how can you plan places in the period from now to 2050 so that trips are made by sustainable means or made locally? That is building development potentially near to transport hubs and building in access to modes of transport and EV charging that allow people to decarbonise. And then replacing transport with digital. So the rollout of ultra-fast broadband connectivity. Could you potentially replace trips with digital connections instead, much like I'm doing here? Mode shift to sustainable mode. So where possible, particularly in urban areas, how can you get people to use walking, cycling, passenger transport, train? How do you make it more attractive to them? And then fourthly, a radical shift to alternative fuels. And it feels like in this part of East of England, that might be a particular element that we need to look at. So the government have said they're going to phase out new sale of petrol and diesel cars by 2030. So how do we gear up our communities to be able to use alternative fuels in a relatively short space of time? So decarbonisation, one of the 4 key pillars of the transport strategy. Neil, can you move on to the next slide, please? So the next slide, connecting growing towns and cities. So the East of England, it doesn't operate like one of the large metropolitan parts of England. We don't have a dominant city like a London or a Manchester. Our story to government has to be quite different for transport. We have over 70 towns and cities within the region that collectively work as an economy together, and it's the connectivity between those towns and cities that is fundamental. Now, we're going to have a lot of growth in those towns and cities and also in rural areas. 320,000 new homes by 2036 and 165,000 new jobs. The diagram on the right-hand side shows part of the economic challenge. We are quite disconnected from some of the large areas of economic mass in the rest of the UK. So that diagram, the dark areas basically show where there's high levels, the highest levels of economic activity in the east of England, in England. And our challenge is to connect more to those and basically to get the shading on our part of the diagram darker. But there's unique opportunities that we want to capitalise on. Transport is an enabler for many of the things, and indeed some of the papers we talked about earlier on around skills, transport is a key enabler for that. We want to support green growth, renewable energy, particularly in Great Yarmouth and this part of the coast, building high-value clusters and attracting skilled workers, improving graduate retention. Currently 1 in 2 graduates leave the region, and integrate with those neighbouring economies. Now, what people have told us over the last 6 months is that relies on better transport connectivity within our region and to UK destinations, particularly east-west. So improving those east-west connections, and I think that's particularly pertinent for Great Yarmouth as well. Neil, can we move on to the next slide, please? And this talks about the third key challenge here, which is supporting rural and coastal connectivity. So with the diagram on the right here shows the extent of what we're calling transport deserts in the east of England. So a transport desert is where you can't access key services by any means apart from the private car in better than a 1 hour frequency. 66% of our rural residents actually live in a transport desert. This has significant issues in terms of accessibility to jobs, services and education, and then plays onto some of those skills issues we talked about earlier on. Part of our transport strategy has to be to support people that live in rural and coastal areas, and particularly so for the east of England. This is going to come through very strongly in our regional strategy. 3 broad strategies here. Get people to places. So how can we improve bus services? How can we improve EV? How can we improve demand responsive transport in those rural and coastal areas? But it's not just about that. It's bringing services to people. So how can we support rural service transformation, as well as digital connectivity, making sure people have access to ultra-fast broadband. But it's not just accessibility, it's connectivity to markets across the wider UK. And this is where our strategy has to have a particular focus on faster strategic connections from coastal towns to the rest of the UK, whether by road or by rail. And I'm sure that's particularly pertinent for Great Yarmouth as well. Neil, can we move on to the fourth and final pillar, please? So this is unlocking our international gateways. So the east of England is a global gateway region. It's always going to be like that because we're close to those strategically located shipping lanes. The Rotterdam, Antwerp, east of England triangle, all the shipping that goes through that shipping lane, going through to the Suez Canal, through to South America, and over the top, over Russia. The east of England is strategically located. Our challenge here is to make the most of them. We had good news recently. We had 2 free ports announced in the east of England. So Freeport East around Felixstowe and Harwich, and also the London Thames port. But it's not just those ports, and obviously Great Yarmouth is fundamental in terms of serving UK and regional markets. And our challenge here is to get faster and more reliable connectivity from those ports to UK markets, as well as supporting mode shift where possible for passengers and freight, and also decarbonising port and airport activities. And the government's strategy that they published last week on decarbonisation had a significant element on decarbonising maritime and aviation. But supporting global gateways is a fundamental part of our strategy. Neil, can you just move on to the next slide, please? So what is it we need to do in each of those 4 areas? Decarbonisation, electric and hydrogen infrastructure revolution. We need this quickly in rural and urban areas, both for private cars, freight and fleet vehicles. In more urban areas, walking, cycling and buses, and also investigating how in rural areas you can support that as well. So a strong focus on decarbonisation, and the toolkit of investment that we're going to ask you for is in that top left there. Connecting growing towns and cities, what do we need to do? Make rail more attractive to people. That's really about unlocking our railways. East-West rail from Norwich, Ipswich and beyond to Great Yarmouth and Lowestoft, through to Cambridge and Oxford. One of the UK's new main line that we're advocating being built here will provide significant connectivity enhancements for this area, as well as the Great Eastern Main Line onto London. On road, the A47, Energy Coast to Midlands, already set out in our first investment plan as one of our key priorities. Also the A11 onto Cambridge and London, and the major road network as well. So significant infrastructure asks within that. Going down to what we're asking for energised rural and coastal communities, better local service provision and high quality digital connectivity for all people and businesses in the East, as well as better buses, better active travel in those rural areas, and also the rollout of EV charging. And then in terms of unlocking international gateways, improving sustainable access for passengers to Norwich and Stansted airports to serve those international aviation markets, and shifting more freight from road to rail, which includes unlocking the Ely junction as one of the major pinch points in our strategic rail network. So that basically sets out the high-level asks that are going to come through the Transport Strategy Investment and Delivery Plan. Neil, can you just move on to the next slide, please? It's not just about infrastructure asks that Transport East is interested in. We also want better ways to deliver transport. Now, I had a really good conversation last week with the Norfolk Strategic Planning Members Forum, where we talked through how Norfolk can address their transport challenges through Transport East. A number of things came out of that, as well as similar voices from elsewhere. Reducing the complexity and increasing the certainty of transport funding. So we're currently operating on a drip of transport funding from government. Part of our ask is multi-year settlements to increase the certainty and reduce the complexity, so it's easier for local areas to deliver transport. Better integrate delivery bodies and different modes of travel. Currently, different agencies working on single mode priority. Part of our challenge in local areas is to bring that all together, and that's very much where Transport East Partnership is coming together, to bring together Highways England, Network Rail, DfT and other bodies to coordinate that investment. Through the Transport East Forum, we are comprised of elected local members. We want to give regional political leaders greater say on delivery priorities, and part of the ongoing development of our strategy is to try to make that happen. The business plan sets out more details of how we're trying to improve the oversight that we have of Highways England and Network Rail and DfT priorities. We need to better coordinate public and private sector initiatives and improve government's understanding of the East of England. So Neil, can you just move on to the final slide, please? This sets out how you can get involved and what we've been doing. So the way in which we're going to do this is through publishing our transport strategy. This will be our single voice for transport investment, which is going to incorporate those themes that I talked about earlier, those investment priorities, and sell that as a single voice to government. This is the priority this year that's set out in the business plan that you've got in your packs. What we've done over the last 6 months is develop an evidence base and engaged heavily. We are now working with partners such as yourselves to understand, is what's coming out of this going in the right direction? In the autumn, we're going to consult publicly on the draft strategy. I'd very much welcome a submission from Great Yarmouth in terms of that public consultation. And then end of 2021, 2022, we're going to review that strategy and prepare the final strategy, which we're going to submit to the Secretary of State by the end of this financial year. That then sets the framework for investment for the East going forwards and gets us on a level playing field with those other regions of the UK that have that in place. Neil, can we just move on to the final slide, please? So this is where I'm going to stop talking and hand back to you, Chair. Great Yarmouth has already been heavily involved in Transport East. As I said, Graham and David have contributed significantly to the partnership. What we need to do going forwards is to build on that, and we need to make sure that we're getting your priorities across in that strategy. I put down 3 discussion points here. Basically, what are your major transport challenges? What are your transport priorities? And how can Transport East support you? And I definitely welcome further liaison and collaboration going forwards. This is very much an introductory session today, but I'll hand back to you, Chair. I'll leave those points as questions for colleagues here, and very happy to take questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Andrew. That's been a really swift run through a very complicated strategy that's being proposed. And of course, I'll keep saying this because it's still not happening. If Highways England don't deliver what it is we put down as a strategy, then we'll have a lot of talking and nothing happening. And that really worries me because that's what we've got at the moment. 2014, when we got the money for the A47 to be improved and not a brick on the ground in 2021. So Highways England, with £300 million in the bank since 2014, have not delivered in Norfolk, and not really seeing where we are with it. A lot of what you've talked about today is about a strategy on delivery and a strategy on infrastructure and a strategy for Great Yarmouth to make sure that it can connect with the rest of the country and Norfolk. It's a very frustrating place to be. I'm hoping that if we get this strategy off the ground and it's supported by everybody across the region, then it will certainly give strength to the arm of Transport East to be able to talk to Highways England and make things happen. That is what we want, is to make things happen, and this is what this strategy is all about. I see Councillor Mockford would like to say a few words, just one more.
Thank you, Chairman. Well, what a refreshing report. I thoroughly enjoyed every minute of that. I could sit here for another 2 hours listening to reports like that. It's very difficult to know where to come in. There's so much that one can say to contribute to this because it means so very much to this borough. We have been exceedingly fortunate here over the last 10 or 15 years, the way we have developed. We start at the entrance to the port at the River Yare, and we've slowly been improving this port over these years until it's now probably one of the best equipped small ports on the East Coast, and it's got an enormous future in front of it with the third river crossing coming in, which is going to make transport in and out of the harbour so much better, with the land that's being released and the chances of new companies coming in to operate on the port side. It is definitely opening up a whole new series of enterprises. I think there's something like about 60 new ship movements planned over the next year or so in the port, in its new business, its agricultural business. It's bringing in fertiliser and it's taking agricultural produce out. We must never forget the huge agricultural backdrop to Great Yarmouth, which historically we always fed, and we've lost that business a lot over the years, but we now have a chance to get it back. We hear a lot about the free ports and we hear a lot about Felixstowe, but there's an enormous amount of ship movement takes place in small ports like Great Yarmouth, and this is such a fantastic port. What we lack is the infrastructure to get our product out quickly to the rest of the country. The biggest tragedy that we have is that we have a railway. We've managed, the county council 20 years ago managed to fight to keep the goods yard at the railway. We never lost that. The rail company wanted to sell it. The county council fought and kept it. But we can't really get our goods out from here that come in by ship to places in the Midlands like Birmingham, Coventry, Leicester, because simply there are 143 bridges between Great Yarmouth and the centre of England that you can't get a container under on a railway truck. It's as simple as that. And we saw on the presentation that 96% of the carbon emission comes from road transport and 1% comes from railway. That must surely show us that the way we've got to move in the future is to move our heavy goods by road, by rail. I mean, if I just think about just what 50 extra ships in this harbour a year mean in terms of goods, vehicles going up and down the Acle Strait. It's going to be years before it gets dulled, I am sure. But that port will grow if we can get the infrastructure of both road and rail established to make it all work properly. Yarmouth has done its bit, it's developed its port, It's developing its infrastructure. It's now up to somebody else to make sure that we've got the communications with the rest of the country. And I hope, Chairman, that we can look forward to seeing something happen on this score. I hope it happens soon. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Well, I mean, that was a rush through, but I mean, the strategy is good. I mean, and I think we all would endorse that. We hope it's successful. I mean, this is a presentation today, and obviously the first steps, but certainly needs to be commended. I mean, Councillor Mockford's talked about the sort of the bigger picture, you know, like 143 bridges to get under before you can get anywhere. But one of the things that concerns most people in Great Yarmouth is the abysmal bus service, basically. I mean, you can get to probably London quicker than you can get from Bradwell to Wellesby by public transport at night. So, you know, I just hope that, because on this forum there's a lot of people on it, but there's sort of no mention of any of the big bus operators. So I just hope that we do try and get to grips with the buses and the coaches, because obviously as far as the green agenda, the more people that stop using their cars and get onto public transport, the better. But, you know, I think we need to be looking at the big picture and also the smaller picture, because, you know, public transport in Yarmouth, as far as buses are concerned, are a bit of a joke at times.
Thank you, Councillor. Did you hear that, Andrew?
Yeah, do you want to come back on some of those points?
Yes, if you would, I'd be grateful.
Yeah, so Councillor Plant, starting with your point of Highways England, yes, you're absolutely right. We need a strategy in place to give us that status so that other bodies such as Highways England, Network Rail have a clear direction that we want to take. And if we're saying this as a single voice and the Secretary of State has endorsed it, then, as you say, it gives greater prominence to what we want. And subsequently, the transport strategy is the way to do that. So you're absolutely right. This is the way to increase the influence that we have on those other delivery agencies. On the point about accessing the Midlands, this is absolutely fundamental. So east-west connectivity from the ports to other parts of the UK is fundamental. I can provide some further information. I realise it was a bit of a rush through today, but we've done some work with Cambridge Econometrics to set out the benefits of that and connecting to those areas of the other parts of England. And indeed, it's actually the East that is driving a lot of the industry in the Midlands and the North and serving through our ports. So there's a real national importance on our ports, and we're at pains to make sure this comes through the strategy as something that's quite unique. Finally, on buses, we've done another piece of work on passenger transport connectivity in the East of England. As I sort of said earlier, it's very poor compared to other parts of England. 66% of our rural population live in what we term a transport desert. That is, there's not a service more than an hour's frequency. Part of the work we're looking to do is work with local authorities, so in this instance Norfolk County Council, to support the forthcoming enhanced bus partnership that they're developing. So in my first slide, I set out the government produced their Bus Back Better strategy. What this does is invites local authorities and operators to come forward with proposals for a partnership approach, and all government funding for buses will be based on that partnership. So Norfolk County Council are doing this, but as a region, we need to make sure that the case for that investment is increased. As we've said previously, a lot of the government funding currently goes to more metropolitan parts of England, and our collective challenge here is through this strategy to make the case for things such as buses here, so that what government appraise and how we get the funding is actually increased compared to what we do otherwise. So part of this is providing air cover for those operators and local authorities that are driving forward bus services. Thanks.
Thanks, Andrew. I suppose the question, I'll come to the councillors in a moment, but the A47 Alliance is a lobbying body, and I read in your papers that Transport East can't lobby or are not allowed to lobby. Is that right?
So through the funding of the Department of Transport, we're not allowed to use that on lobbying. However, Transport East is also funded by local authorities. And there's work that we do through that funding, work with our MPs, to work with our business leaders, to make sure more investment in our region is getting through. So we, as Transport East, through the
You're breaking up a bit, Andrew.
So that's clear advice on this is what we need to invest in. And then we're also working with other partners. We had an MPs roundtable a few months ago, and we're continuing that up to the comprehensive spending review to make sure that other people are clear on what our priorities are. I think in reality, things have to work together. The technical evidence, the strategy, and the work that MPs do, the work that business leaders do when they are having communications with ministers and government. So it's very much working together on this. I think invariably advocacy and the strategy are both needed by the partners.
Lovely. Thank you very much. Colleen?
Thank you, Chairman. The Acle Strait is probably the longest saga that I've ever had the misfortune to deal with for as long as I can remember, even going back to when my grandfather was driving lorries to and from Leicester into Great Yarmouth. That road has been one of the busiest, most deadly roads, given that it's the way into Great Yarmouth and out of Great Yarmouth. It's a road that needs and has always needed widening, if not dualling. We get promised money from different governments time and time again, and yet nothing happens. You yourself pointed out, Chairman, that Highways England have had money sitting around and not one bit of tarmac laid or a road widened. And I think that's a sad indictment of what's happening here in the East. Given, as I've said, that road is the lifeline into and out of Great Yarmouth. I understand that the Third River Crossing, I've worked on it for 22 years, so I would know, will make a difference. But I still think the artery leading in and out of this town is that Acle Strait, and we need to get government and Highways England in particular to agree. We've done everything we've been asked to do. We've looked at moving snails, we've looked at wildlife, we've looked at foliage, we've looked at everything. One excuse after another. I see you smile, Chairman, but it is a fact. The other issue, and one Trevor has raised, is buses and the fact that subsidies are no longer readily available to bus companies. And I hear people say, oh, they're privately owned, they should be able to manage. They can't. Bus routes are in need of subsidies. We as councillors spend our allowances on putting in bus shelters for our elderly and infirm, only for the bus company to take off the buses. So not only are we wasting our money on bus shelters, but bus passes are being issued to people for them to use, to be able to access transport as and when required. We have a requirement to do that, but it's not happening. And I'm just wondering if, I know this isn't a lobbying body, but we've got to be able to do something to prove the need for this particular strategy to work. So I would like to hear from the gentleman what his views are on what I've already said. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Colleen. I think to add to that, the County Council subsidise bus movements across the county to the tune of about £7 million a year, and the old people's subsidy on free travel, the government do put something like £11 million in, but the County Council subsidises that to the tune of £3 to £4 million a year as well. So that itself is £11 to £12 million that the County Council puts in to subsidise bus use in the county. But you are totally right in what you say. This has to be a more sustainable way forward. We can't be allowing a... Well, this is our opportunity to speak to Andrew to put it in the strategy. So I think he's heard what you said. Let's listen to what he's got to answer.
Yeah, thank you very much, Chair. And I fundamentally agree with the sentiment put forward there as well. But buses they just don't work financially at present in environments outside of urban areas. So where they do work well, in London, in Manchester, etc., there's a different system, different governance. The work that we are doing at the minute with partners here is to respond to government's Bus Back Better strategy. And it might be worth me circulating the details of this afterwards. Transport East has published a report that sets out an evidence base for investment in buses and passenger transport in the east of England. It sets out the uniqueness of our challenge, and it sets out the particularly challenging funding situation that operators find themselves in, and particularly post-COVID. Moving forward, there's a number of things that we're asking for through this strategy. So I guess in response, yes, we are asking for more investment for buses and to change the way that things are done. We support the enhanced partnership approach that is being developed. Now, an enhanced partnership is what is going to be coming in over the next year, which is a partnership between operators and local authorities to better coordinate services, and that will attract investment from government. Currently, there's £3 billion available from government for investment in bus services, and we need to give ourselves the best possible chance of securing as much of that as possible, and that is by making sure that we're working with Norfolk County Council and the districts, and also we're highlighting that in our strategy. Alongside the investment, though, it's greater flexibilities of funding. I think Councillor Plant talked about some of the challenges with the way that the government fund passenger transport and buses. One of the things we need is a bit more flexibility to the local level to be able to direct investment in buses, and also greater coordination between the operators and the local authorities. And that's things such as ticketing, it's information to passengers, it's coordination of services. At the minute, a lot of different operators working sort of by themselves. If that could be better coordinated and a greater focus on customers and thinking through what does a customer need to unlock their barriers to using a bus and putting that in place through a partnership, then I think there's going to be a way forward here. But it's not going to be easy, but making that case for investment is fundamental. And I think in answer to the question, yes, buses are going to be key to the strategy. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I mean, just to comment on the Acle Strait, you know, I can't emphasise how disappointed I am that despite the efforts of you, Chairman, and our local MP, Brandon Lewis, we still have not managed to have a spade in the ground. So I'm really hoping that this strategy and this representation will bring about some further actions to get this important project to a start, because, you know, we've got so many things moving forward in Great Yarmouth, positive things, and this seems to be the one block that we cannot seem to crack at this time. In relation to that then, I appreciate you broke up slightly when trying to answer one of the questions, and you may have answered it in that, but I couldn't pick it out clearly. But I'm interested to hear how Transport East can properly represent the East at the next comprehensive spending review in the autumn if it can't truly lobby. And my second question relates to the buses, which I do have some agreements on with fellow members. In the case of Great Yarmouth, who has come forward, bus companies, when you are encouraging them to have an input? Are we having, I mean, are the numbers positive, and are we getting the sort of numbers coming forward that we would want?
Thanks, Andrew. Back to you, if you could.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll pick those up. So in terms of Transport East's relationship with government, the letter that we had from the Secretary of State is that we now have a direct line to the Secretary of State. So we provide investment priorities. So we've collectively worked to get to that position where this strategy, and indeed the work we're going to be doing up to the Comprehensive Spending Review, is going to go straight to ministers and the Secretary of State and taken as our voice. That's a long way further than we were 2 or 3 years ago. But also, in addition, we are working with MPs, we're working with business leaders to support the work that they do as well when they have conversations with government. So we had a good workshop a few months ago with our regional MPs where we talked through what their investment priorities are and the work that they do within Parliament, including asking parliamentary questions, etc. And part of the work that we're doing as Transport East is working closely with them to make sure that they also have the single voice argument that we're putting for our strategy. So it's seeing Transport East as a partnership. It's not just one body. You're part of Transport East, so are all the other local authorities, each with their communications strategies. And the aim here is to get a single voice, so that through all the channels that are going through to government, we're saying the same thing, and that message comes across loud and clear. So hopefully that covers that point.
You want to come back, Councillor?
Yeah, sorry, Chairman. Well, that was on the first point. I appreciate the answer, but I do struggle to see how we can be properly represented by Transport East at the spending review by form of a letter. You know, it's just I'm concerned with the fact that we can't lobby, which would put us in a far stronger position. But also, I didn't receive an answer for my second question, Chairman, regarding who's come forward actually for Great Yarmouth in response to bus companies, and you know, who has come forward if we're looking at positive numbers.
Yeah, thanks. Apologies for not responding to the second question. So I don't have exact names right now. I can get back to you. What we did do was held a number of workshops over the spring with operators. I can get you the details of those. I don't have them to hand. We've also worked very closely with Norfolk County Council, who oversee the development of the enhanced partnership, which is being developed, to make sure that we have representation from across the region. So if I can make a commitment to get back to you with who's been involved at an operator level, I don't have them to hand, but I can certainly do that.
Thanks, Andrew. I'm not seeing anybody else. Oh, Tony.
Yeah, just very quickly, Chairman. Obviously, it's great that we've got a transport strategy, and probably the way to go forward is obviously to have various regional strategies. And obviously, with those, I think what our difficulty is going to be is obviously we cover such an area from North Anglia down to South Anglia, which touches on to London. And I think one of the issues that we're going to be faced with is, and presumably the people organising the strategy, is the fact that with two free ports down at the southern part of the region, that is going to be one of the priorities, I think, for significant funding, i.e. on rail freight certainly, and perhaps probably to a lesser extent on that basis for roads, because for instance on the Felixstowe, I know the A120, there's a huge lobby to get that road sorted out, because it is quite a bad road, such as is the Acle Strait. But in relation to what Councillor Mogford has said in regard to freight from Great Yarmouth, I think it's not just about the bridges. It's the fact that we have a single track line from Yarmouth through to Acle, or nearly to Acle. That is the biggest problem, because we did try having freight there in, I think it was about 15 years ago, when we were taking fertiliser out of the town. It just didn't work. It didn't stack up with the amount of passenger trains that were coming through on that particular line. So that is going to be a serious issue there. And I think the original plans were that we were going to have a rail line right down to the outer harbour, which obviously is not going to happen, never going to happen. So that's taken that out of the equation. I think we have to be realistic on what we can actually achieve, and I think people have certainly mentioned the question of the public transport system, whether it's train or whether it's buses. I think we have to rely on those in terms of the public transport, but clearly what we do rely on more than most, and we will rely on for certainly for the future, certainly the foreseeable future, is going to be our road strategy. So I'll be interested to see what actually comes out of the report and what the priorities are going to be for the region. But I would hazard a guess that, as has happened in the past, significant funding will be more earmarked towards the Freeport side of the industry rather than the south. I'm not saying we won't get anything, but clearly, you know, we're all exasperated over the question of the Acle Strait duel, and there's been all sorts of issues that have been raised on there, and you know, clearly this has now been put back again for a decision in 5 years' time, And at that time, I think we're still going to be paying off the massive debt that we've got through COVID. And I think that there'll be a huge pressure on public spending. And I fear that we probably won't get the dualling, but I'm hopeful that we'll get widening of the road certainly sometime in the very near future. But I'm not going to hold my breath on that one. But clearly what I say is that, yes, we do need the strategy. I'm just hopeful that we get our fair share of the cake in terms of what our priorities are going to be. But let's don't hold any hope out in terms of rail freight, because I don't think that's going to be a go as far as we're concerned. Let's concentrate on what we have and what we can see that we can have for the future in terms of public transport, in terms of buses and for rail, and then look at the roads as well as far as we're concerned.
Thank you, Tony. I think that's important that we get the economy moving as quickly as we can to pay off this debt that we're running up through COVID. So I think what's being proposed for Great Yarmouth is really good and timely, should I say. But there's also the tech corridor as well between Cambridge and Norwich, which is a really important element of the east-west movement, which I think is something we need to be concentrating on, because I believe the train between Norwich and Thetford is about, I don't know, 15 miles an hour or something because of the state of the track. So, I mean, it just needs investment. It's ridiculous that we've got in this century, and we're talking about improving rail, a rail track or a rail system that is archaic. And yes, I totally agree with what members are saying, that we do need to improve the rail, but we need to be careful what we prioritise and where we want to prioritise it to, because the money can only be spent once, I suppose. Paul.
Thank you, Chair. Not such a grand thing, but footpaths that would link up our villages and cycleways, because a lot of people can't get between village and village because they feel too vulnerable to walk in the evenings. Most of our roads between villages are national speed limit 60 mile an hour. My grandson, a few weeks ago, got dropped in Martham on the way home because the bus didn't stop for him in Winterton, and we had to go and pick him up and drive him back to Winterton so he could get home because he was too scared to walk that road. And I feel that if there was decent, safe walking ways between the villages, people would visit their neighbours by walking rather than driving. They could cycle between villages, and this is part of the way forward, to get people off the roads, out of their cars, healthier lifestyles, safe.
I'm sure that's part of a greater plan as well for lowering the carbon emissions as well. So yes, I understand completely what you're saying.
And then secondly, a lot of our CO2 comes from agriculture, because we've got big farm vehicles using diesel. They're never going to become battery powered, so we've got to be looking at some way of getting them to be hydrogen.
I think you heard that, Andrew?
Yeah.
Okay. Right, I think we've had some good conversations on this, a good debate. There isn't a recommendation for this. This is quite literally a presentation. Andrew, thank you for your presentation. When you come back to us with the strategy, obviously David and the team will be working in any proposals that we have from Great Yarmouth. And thank you for your time tonight.
Thank you very much. It's been good to meet you. Your strategy over the autumn. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Andrew. Cheerio. Right. We have any other business? I have no any other business. And then we have exclusion of the public for items 10 and 11, which are confidential minutes of the Transport and Infrastructure Steering Group and the Town Centre Master Plan minutes.
So, Chairman, if no member wishes to speak on the minutes, we can just take them as noted, and we don't need to close the meeting, invoke the confidentiality clause and discuss. It's up to how members feel.
Okay, we've had the minutes in our papers. Does any member wish to speak on the minutes? I'm not seeing that.
Chairman, just very quickly, why can they not be heard in open? Because I don't see anything contentious in there. I don't see anything that is...
Because Councillor, they're confidential working group minutes. They're not open to the public. The actual meetings are closed closed working groups, so therefore they're confidential.
So they'll never be for the public to view?
Only when whatever's been discussed in the item is obviously, taking public the strategy or whatever at that stage, but until they remain confidential.
There just doesn't seem to be anything sort of,
Well, it's because they're working groups.
Yeah.
Does anybody wish to make any comments on them? We close the public? No. We take those minutes as read. Thank you very much. And that brings the meeting to an end. Thank you very much indeed. Good night, everybody.